Okay, yesterday we had gotten to Lily with a review of what themes and topics we were going to work on. And Lily, are you ready to go again this morning?
Okay.
Good, good, good. Just pick it up and we'll do the same thing with you. Now remember, pay enough attention that you can ask intelligent questions of her that will help her and also clarify your own understanding as we go along. So pay enough attention that you could pick up the responsibility at any moment and continue to make the experience as positive as possible for Lily.
My interest is on the spiritual development of the elderly Chinese, their learning. Because seeing the global aging phenomenon, we're seeing more and more of the elderly people in the church. And they are able people in the sense that cognitively and physically they are able. And they are present in most of the church meetings, even more regular than the other age group. However, I'm seeing that the church, at least in the Chinese church, we're doing a disservice to the elderly. At worst, they are there in adult Sunday school or in the fellowship or in the worship services with the other generations put together, assuming or taken for granted that they will learn because they are there. At best, they are being segregated in their own age group from the other age groups to learn or to grow. However, a question that I'm asking is, how do elderly learn, or how do elderly Chinese learn? What is the effective? What is the most effective, or what is a more effective way of learning for them spiritually? And so when I go with this interest, I go into the literature, and I see a lot of, a growing literature on intergenerational learning. It's not just putting all the generations together to learn about something, but it's a learning that that is designed, structured for the elderly to be learning and teaching with other generations, especially the children in the school setting where they do a lot of senior volunteer work. And so I'm asking the question, can intergenerational learning experience be an alternative for effective learning of the elderly Chinese? And I don't know, for now the topic that I've come up with is spiritual development of the elderly in Taiwan churches through or and intergenerational learning experiences. Because in our context, it's not that there are no intergenerational program or intergenerational experience in the church, but that all the generations are put together to learn about something. But what I'm after is, or what I'm seeing in the literature is intergenerational, or generations coming together, especially the elderly with the other generations coming together, and in a face-to-face interaction, or they're learning interactively. Helping each other out, or in a sharing mode, not just sitting here and learning about something with no interaction. Am I making sense?
So the huge body of literature, adult education, children. So we are going to look this too and try to put together.
My main population would still be the elderly, but then because a lot of literature out there in the educational realm is with the elderly and the children. More and more are the elderly and the adolescents, elderly and adults, or elderly and the middle age, but more are with the children because of the senior volunteer work
Do you
that
find
is
that literature
growing.
in the intergenerational topical area or in the adult learning topical area?
In fact, up to this point, there's still no journal on the name intergenerational, or even in the educational encyclopedia. However, I find a lot of intergenerational learning experiences literature in what you call the Gerontological Social Work Journal, Journal of Gerontological Social Work, or even in Journal of Gerontology or Journal of Educational Gerontology.
Good, good. Well, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Those names show us that you're really looking into it. Social work is a field we haven't mentioned before.
Yes.
What is social work as a field? Is it a social science discipline or is it something else?
It's a practical application.
Practical, applied, those are the two governing words here. It's an applied field in the same sense that almost any discipline has at one edge its applicational foci. What would be an analog in the field of teaching and learning, teacher education?
I guess
It would not be educational research literature. What kind of literature would it be? What would you expect the journal to be called that was at this comparable edge of the field of teaching and learning?
Training teachers,
Close.
teacher development.
It'd be the teaching materials on teaching itself. Materials on teaching itself. Just like social work is the applicational field of the whole sociological research area. Sociology is the research area that feeds into social work. Actually, sociology, political science. Gerontology is the study of the elderly. Just like pediatrics is a study of children medically. Childhood education is a study of children education. Now, that's where you begin to see how your disciplines fit together. But she is quite correct that she's going to find most of the literature not in the field of adult intergenerational topics per se, because there aren't journals yet that are that focused. But you're going to find a good many things in the gerontology literature. You're also going to find things in the sociology literature. Where else might she find material?
I find some in aging and human development,
You're right.
that journal.
You're right. Now, what is the difference between journals that are using words like aging to describe themselves over against journals that are using the term gerontology? There's a subtle difference there.
Is it because it's more practical?
Yes. Very good. Gerontology would be toward the more theoretical end, and it would involve a good bit of the medical literature.
Yes.
Whereas aging, studies of aging, would be more sociological and more practical in
Psychological.
function. That sounds very promising. I want you, each one, during this experience, to get very familiar with the way the literature lies and what topical areas are represented by literature, so that you can get comfortable with what you're looking at. And the way to do this, of course, is just to start in somewhere. Find something, and then look at that something and see what it branches out, journal out, and study the journal itself. And see in that volume of the journal what other kinds of things are being discussed in the various articles. And then look at the bibliographies of those other articles and get an idea of where some of the other literature that is similar might be. And especially if you're using journals as your key, much more than book titles. Journals will begin to give you a sense of where the tracks are. What's wrong with simply looking up books? And there's a great deal wrong with focusing on books. That's what you've been taught to do up to this point. But now I'm saying that's the wrong way to go. Why is it the wrong way to go?
I think they tend to be dated.
Well, that's part of it. But journals can get dated too. The difference is that you're more aware that journals will go front and back from that date. But that's not quite it.
Journals more research-based?
The journals will inevitably have a better research base.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably.
Mm-hmm.
The better journals will have a better research base. And they will have a greater likelihood of branching you out systematically into the related fields. A good book and its bibliography may do that, but you can move faster, clearly faster, with a journal approach. Now, does that mean that you don't use books in your project? Is that what I said?
Yeah.
No, that's not what I said. But I'm saying if you want to learn how the literature lies, the journal approach is much apt to be a profitable payoff for you.
But I'm seeing quite a few recently books that are edited works, which is very research-based because they pull out the good articles from the journal and then put it into a book. And those are really worth reading.
Yes. Now, I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, what most of us regard as the gold mines, the place you finally find where the real gold is, will be books that are done by people who have dedicated themselves to collecting and organizing the literature. And once you find one of those gold mine books, you'll say, wow, here's the help I really need. And now and then you'll come across one. It's generally a book done by somebody who really is an authority in this field, but who has realized that one of the great needs is for somebody who really knows the field to pull up into one place a lot of the better materials and the landmark studies. Now, there are in some fields people who really have become and built their whole career out of the business of organizing in literature. Let me give you a name you may have run across. See if you know the name.
Leadership.
Right.
Handbook on leadership.
Right.
And then there's Bass and Stokes, whatever, Stark, Still. He's Ohio State University, right?
Right. He's an old man by now, but he has literally given the last part of his academic career to building the literature coordination for this huge, sprawling field called leadership. So the Stockdale books on leadership are the gold mines. So if you're into leadership research, Stockdale is a name to trace quickly. And he has several composites of the literature reviews. Okay? Now, it doesn't follow that a edited collection is inherently a good book. Edited collections, in fact, generally have a bad name. So an edited collection is not the answer. But it happens that these sorts of books, in fact, are edited collections. So there's a tremendous range in value of edited collections. You know what an edited collection is? It's written by many different people. One example from this person, one from this person, one from this person. Generally, those books emerge as a wonderful idea. And that's the way they get started. The person who intends to edit this puts out a letter to 30 of his friends and says, give me the best piece you can, either something that's recent or something new, on this topic. And he names the topic. And he writes those letters to his friends. Half of his friends write back. The other half pretend they didn't get the letter. Now, when you pretend you don't get the letter, you're too busy and you don't want to have to quite confess that you're too busy, but you are. Okay, so you forget the letter. And the half that write back to it will say, I have in mind an article or a writing that would deal with this and this and this. Would this meet the need of the book you talked about? Then when the compiler that sent out the request gets that letter back, what does he do? He says, oh no, that's not what I had in mind at all. But it's from his friend.
Yeah, but
And here's where the book starts to go wrong. Because he will write back a very gentle letter and says, Fred, what I had in mind was, yes, somewhat like what you're saying, but more of this and this and this and this and this. And then George writes back to Fred and says, I understand. I've got it. I'll do it. And then Fred gets started writing this book, this chapter, or this section, and he remembers what he really wanted to do. And zoop, it goes way over this direction. Little by little, the original author is stuck with a bunch of stuff that doesn't quite fit together. Now that is a typical process, which is one reason why compiled articles in a single edited book is quite often a very frustrating experience. So they have a bad name. In fact, many publishing companies will not publish them anymore. They're regarded as hard to sell. They're rarely adopted as textbooks, and if they don't get adopted as textbooks, scholarly works don't have a chance to make it. That requires backing down at one point. Now, literature of the compilation sort is usually very expensive because it doesn't sell very well.
yeah.
So it isn't just a compilation that you're looking for, but it's a compilation by a person who independently has a strong name recognition in that field. Because if it's a Stockdale, and he gets in a bunch of stuff that he's asked for from his friends, and is not right on the target, he's strong enough to say, Greg, that was nice, but I can't use it. So Stockdale is strong enough to throw it out. So his compilations are very strong. So again, what's the answer? You have to pay attention. You have to know who's doing the outstanding writing. And you have to follow their authorship and their compilation. But especially if you find a manual of or a handbook of. Handbook is a very common word in scholarly writing. It means a book that was designed to be, for a number of years, 3, 4, 5 years, a good, solid, reliable source book. Hence a handbook. When you find things that are of some great value, and this is a warning to you in this course now, you find something that really is exciting and valuable, bring it in here. Or if you can't bring it in by virtue of it's being locked in the library, bring in a citation on it and a brief note on what its value is and pass it around. We are here as a community of scholars trying to support and help and encourage one another, not trying to look good individually. We will all look great individually if we look good collectively. And just bear that in mind. Because that's a very, very important thing. You find good, solid sources. And they're, especially if they deal with common areas. By the time we get around this circle, we'll see that there's a lot of common areas. And so bear that in mind and try to do some sharing with them. It increases the power of this course a whole lot. Any other questions?
Thinking that he really needs to narrow it down, and I don't know if that would be helpful because he mentioned about the concept of God as Father, and also the fatherhood in the society. So I'm just wondering if it would be helpful if he would explore this, how the concept of God would affect, or how is it associated with the fatherhood, the role of father, or the relationship of father in the family among Japanese Christians. He has to identify the population and the topic that he wants, so he could come up with a more workable literature. I don't know, I'm just repeating.
I'm glad you got us back into that, because I didn't mention that part. I was hoping that some of the rest of you would have picked up that, and you did. He's making his life much more complicated when he says, I want to track out or identify out the sources of family values. And I'm making the assumption that the American society has more clear reflection on the sources from Scripture. Christian values than would a non-Christian traditional society. Well, all of a sudden we're in two big problems there. We have the research problem defined now, long before we study the literature. The research problem is, can you, and to what extent is there an effect? Can you track, and is there an effect of the Christian roots of the Western or the American family system? Nobody's ever been able to establish that. That's a good research question. But I will visit you when I am 95, and we will discuss your progress. At that time, you will be somewhat older too. It'll take that kind of time to get hold of that. You see, you made an assumption, and you simply hold it as a declared assumption. That is, that you would expect that somewhere in the American society you would see an effect of the Christian society on the images of father. Ooh, got bad news for you. Bad news for you. There are societies that have had virtually no Christian influence that show a stronger effect of values that you would call Christian on the formation of family than the American. The American is virtually a non-Christian society in terms of family values.
I hear what you're saying. You're saying that though on the basis of your education and experience, but somebody such as Akira who doesn't have that,
Right.
Wouldn't that still be a legitimate way of trying to formulate a topic?
No.
No.
Not if he can be warned off by it, by somebody who's been down that road. See, this is one of the things that you have to remember, is the purpose of the literature is to show you the way. Now, sometimes you find these warnings by reading. Sometimes you find them by talking with people who've done these sorts of things, which is not inherently different. It's sourcing from experience, all right? Now, the reason why I say no with a fairly sharp response there is that there's a danger in making any kinds of assumptions, and especially when you know that you're making an assumption, and letting that assumption drive your approach so obviously as this one does. He would be much better off saying, is there any effect that has been noted by researchers in this field, than he would be saying, is there any effect? Hear the difference?
Yeah.
You see, he might look for that as an inquiry,
regardless of what's written.
right? But there's a danger in bringing that into it and say, I'm sure this is the case. It's just a matter of finding it. That can be very frustrating. This is the one that caused me to say, look at it comparatively. If there is any difference between the Japanese and the American, for example, could that difference be attributed to the differential influences of religious roots? Treat that more as a question than as a hypothesis. When you're approaching literature, it's well not to bring hypotheses to it. And even to watch your assumptions. Keep them under control. But definitely don't bring assumptions. Don't bring hypotheses. Because literature doesn't give you a good basis for testing hypotheses. Does that help at all? Do either of those. I wouldn't try to do both of them. One of the things you might be able to manage is to find the major journals that deal with the sociology of family. And there is a tremendous amount of very good growing literature in the field that is commonly called family. There are a number of journals dealing with family development, family this, family that, families all over the place. Now the roots of that research, interestingly, are partly from psychology, partly from sociology, and partly from human ecology, which is a field that has originated as the homely field of home economics. The homely field of home economics, which arose around 1912, has matured into human ecology And most major universities today do not have departments of home economics. They have departments of human ecology. And it's their literature that's dealing with these kinds of family relationships and doing it extremely well. You find literature on human ecology, family ecology.
Ecology, not
That'll help. Human ecology and family ecology. And you will find in that literature that this sort of question of what's happening as the society interacts with families today, what's happening to fatherhood. I would look at that in terms of what's it say in the American literature. Then look at the question, is there any parallel in the Japanese literature? Because I'm sure, in fact I know for a fact, that there is a good strong Japanese literature emerging too. And you've got the additional talent of being able to handle that stuff in its linguistic original. And you might not find it here in the linguistic original, but you can get at it when you get back into the Japanese context. I think these are worthy possibilities. Now, what I was trying to do to illustrate in this one is that just because something is vague and not yet formed should not discourage us from proceeding down that road. But it will require certain kinds of techniques so that you don't simply dissipate all your energy. It's like spilling a quart of water on a flat floor. You know, that quart of water can go all over the place. And try to regather it again is very difficult. What you need to do is put your energy into a nice container that will not spread it all over the floor, that will hold it together. And so you need to define that container that you're going to use. But I would think one of your major possibilities is to just stay within the last 25, 30 years of the literature that you can access in Northwestern on family ecology, and look particularly at how fatherhood, or father roles, father images, father values, is being affected by contemporary society. Now that will not give you the psychohistorical, but to get the psychohistorical, you're asking for 20 years of hard work and a lot of writing, a lot of reading. So don't take that on for 941. It could be very frustrating.
Earlier, one of his first statements mentioned the philosophical literature. Would that be appropriate for the goals of this course?
No, but the philosophical and the religious will undergird. So you don't ignore it. You just don't major it. Your whole theological often occurs in social science as you're interpreting your findings. That's where your theological comes in.
Sure.
Because you interpret through your theological framework. But if you split yourself and say, I'm going to do a theological portion, I'm going to do a scientific portion, and then I'm going to somehow bring it together, maybe. But probably not.
But for the purposes of this course, that would be too much.
Too much. Don't ever assume that I said that means you can't do theological emphases. I want you. Okay? Are you helped a little bit?
Yeah.
Let's take a brief break and then we'll pick it up again and we'll move over.
Yeah, they should be grounded in the Christ, the identity. They should have God's spiritual identity. But the paper we are dealing with is from must be from the literature that deals with sociology and anthropology. So, okay, I tried to look for sources in the library, but it's hard to find the literature that explains this issue exclusively for Koreans.
Altitude, latitude, longitude, latitude.
So I gotta use
You have two big problems. First of all, you're not really inquiring. You've got to learn how to ask questions. You're preaching. You have done nothing but preach to us. You know what the problems are. The only thing is you got to get some literature that will fulfill this paper so you can get on with preaching. You're not thinking as an inquirer, and that can get you in big trouble. And I think you have to work on that one very hard. All of you need to pay attention to whether or not you're hearing the voice of an inquirer or a preacher. Very important. One thing to already understand a problem well enough that you know what you need to know more about. It's quite another to know a problem so well that you have the answers. And you really don't need anything else unless it supports your answers. And that's what I'm hearing in you. I don't hear you asking, what are the problems? How can we define these problems? Because you see, in your mind, that's already settled. Now, let us look at the real problem here. The real problem is that everybody knows, not just the Koreans, everybody knows that there are difficulties as the first generation, the immigrant Korean, is dealing with the children of that generation who are becoming raised in America. There's a problem there. There are lots of problems there. Now, what are the solutions? You can't talk solutions until you talk a real understanding of that problem. There are problems in the relationship there, but part of the difficulty is that various Korean people are defining those problems differently. And there is no real consensus on how we can understand this problem. So your first generation people say the real problem is that the second generation are wandering away from Korean values because they're not interested in the Korean language. Now that's one way of looking at it. But the first generation Koreans are very sure that that's the way the problem lies. The second generation people are saying we have to all wander away from the first generation because they're trying to hold us back into an old mentality, and they're trying to force on us old ways of thinking, and we can't be effective Americans if we're going to do that. Now, that produces a lot of tension. But notice the definition of the problem is different here and here. Now, identity crisis is a big, vague generalization that will explain anything if you ask it to. It doesn't help. It really doesn't help. What do you mean identity crisis? These people don't know who they are. Well, yes, they do. These people don't know who they are. Yes, they do. Identity crisis? No. It's identity conflict. It's identity conflict. Now then, how do we understand those conflicts? There isn't much literature dealing with understanding those conflicts. There's a lot of literature dealing with preachings about different kinds of solutions to these problems. Everybody is running around doing solutions before they've really tried to understand the problem. And that is true in so much of human behavior today, not just in the religious education field, but particularly we get into that in the religious education field, where we just think in terms of instantly running to the solutions. Never mind trying to understand the problem. Now, this is a lesson for all of us. We've got to be very cautious not to get sucked into that trap. The purpose of this paper is not to solve a problem. The purpose of this paper is not to preach a thesis. The purpose of this paper is to explore and to be open to the possibility that there are insights that are deeper than any you've ever had. Now, all of you here are concerned about spiritual welfare of people. All of you are concerned about people's relationship to God. All of us are concerned about these ultimate life and death matters. Right. But the point is, we're going to become much more competent in dealing with those things if we have a broader understanding from all sorts of sources of how to see those problems and how to deal with them. Don't look for methodological answers. Don't look for methodological answers. This is my last point. Don't presuppose that the purpose here is to find the methodology, the procedures that will solve the problems. Now, those of you who are educator in your background, an educator in your experience, and have been educated, are going to tend to think in terms of what content can we give people to solve the problem. Try to fight that off. Once again, the issue is not how do we do it, or what do we use to do it, but what is the it? What is it if we're trying trying to do? The answer is, it has to be the product of your understanding as deeply as you can get of what that phenomenology is. So be really cautious not to fall into these traps. Very serious traps. And spend time talking with one another about how you understand your problem area. A number of you have done this, and it shows. And you're using the time together wisely and well. I'm very encouraged. But be really cautious about these traps, because you fall into them and it's very hard to pull back out again. They are human tendencies, and they are one of the consequences of education that is focused on information. We're after education in this experience here that is focused on deeper reasoning, analysis, and synthesis, and evaluation. Not just interpreting ideas, statements, facts. Those are the raw materials. But your mind is a wonderful instrument given to you by God if you just use it for much more elaborate kinds of uses. You're not here to memorize things. You're here to reason, to think, to create. So I think, yeah, you're asking a crucial question. But the point here is that, and this is really what it comes down to in all these conversations here in the last hour, the issue is to understand the research requires a kind of detachment from the preaching task until you get the grounding in the knowledge and the understanding of what is the case among human beings. It doesn't mean you advocate it simply because you find it among human beings. But you have to really know what the research literature says. And I think that's the big rub we have. And what you can do in that literature is never mind the question of what the church ought to be doing. What are the consequences? Laying those consequences out then gives us another task, and that is to make some decisions. But when you combine the decision task and the inquiry task in the same function, you run some very severe risks. So that's why I keep bumping on this question. Are you inquiring or are you preaching? And those have to be two different things. Now, obviously, I don't want you to be a disintegrated person who doesn't see any relationship. And we should ultimately know what we stand for. One of the reasons I am outspoken is because I have a belief that is very unusual among higher education faculty. I believe that the professor in the classroom has every right to advocate, to profess. So I profess. I'm a professor. So you don't have to wonder where I'm at. There are people who like to see the educative process as simply posing the questions without really any great guidance, helping you to find things for yourself. I want you to do that, but I want you to know what you're up against when you're up against me. Because I'm here for a professing purpose. Now, I've got freedom within that for people to have different kinds of opinion and to see things the way they want to see them. What I don't have space for is people who want to do those jobs in a half-effort kind of a way. I'm very discouraged.